はい、それでは皆さんこんにちは。午後のセッションに入りたいと思います。私はRRI のワーキング1の、共同主査であります IHI に勤めております村上でございます。本日はよろしくお願いいたします。ではセッションに入ります前に1点お願いがございます。セッション1と同様に後ほどのパネルディスカッションに向けて講演者に質問のある方は YouTube オンラインで入られている方は YouTube の概要欄にあるリンクから Q&A サイトスライドを開きご質問とお名前の欄にご所属とお名前を入力いただきたくお願いいたします。では、セッション2でございますが、データ循環と価値創造というテーマで進めていきたいと思います。このセッションは講演3件をいただきまして、それからパネルディスカッションで議論をさせていただきたいと思います。短い時間ですが、よろしくお願いいたしたいと思います。で早速ではございますが、最初のご登壇でございます。ドイツのフランホーファー ISST ディレクターのポリス・オット先生です。テーマは、これか。データシェアリング・イン・インダストリアル・データ・エコシステムスでございます。では、オット先生、お願いいたします。
Good morning and good day. So I would like to thank everyone for the presentation, for the invitation. I'm a bit sad that I cannot be on site because I would love to meet you all again. But this time it did not work out. So bear with me that if you would invite me next year, I would do everything possible to join in presence. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about data sharing in industrial ecosystems, and I would like to start with a perspective on data sharing, which is sometimes a little bit forgotten, which basically addresses the question, well, why do companies engage in data sharing? And we did a little analysis about, let's say, data sharing initiatives in Europe, but also in other places of the world, in order to identify the rationale, the reasons why ecosystems emerge in order to make use of data. As you know, data sharing is not an end in itself, but it rather happens for a purpose. And we at least can identify 5 patterns that are listed here, which motivate companies and ecosystems to form in order to share data. First of all, there is a very straightforward reason to team up, which we have also known from other, let's say, occasions in, let's say, economic development, which is cost sharing. In order to share data, companies come together to, for example, share a common burden. For example, to be compliant to a certain legislation. In Europe, in particular in Germany, one example is the so-called Supply Chain Act that has been introduced, which requires companies to be transparent about the adherence to environmental, societal standards across the entire value chain. And that basically also refers to companies up the value chain, so which basically means that information must be shared across the entire value network in order to make sure that nobody in the value chain is violating, for example, a regulation when it comes to child labor and so on. Other patterns are more, and this is depicted with the letter B, related to joint innovation, where companies and organizations alike team up to make to seize the opportunities of data in terms to create a new service, for example. And I always refer to examples from myself. So if I do a business trip for example, starting at home at my home in Dortmund in Germany. I would take, for example, the bus that takes me to the metro station, and then I would take the metro that takes me to the central station in Dortmund, and then I board a train from Deutsche Bahn, which takes me, for example, to an airport in Düsseldorf, and then I would board a plane, for example, to Zurich in Switzerland. And then I would also use another suburban train, and then I would end up in a taxi, which takes me to the hotel. So, and in this mobility chain, you see that basically I am using the services of like 7 or 8 mobility service providers, but none of them basically is orchestrating my trip, right? That would be highly appreciated by myself because, for example, in cases of delays, for example, with a train, the airline could automatically book me to a later flight, for example, but that would require that all the different companies that I'm engaging with do not only share their data, for example, timetables, or let's say the flight that I'm assigned to, or automatically check me in when I arrive in the hotel, but also data about myself. So, for example, my travel preferences, also my credit card information, which I would be happy to share if I could rely on the fact that these companies would treat it trustworthy. And they should also combine this information from themselves and from myself with context information. As I said, for example, delays in certain train connections, or if I would basically go to the airport by car, traffic conditions, and so on and so on. You can also nicely see in this pattern B, so joint innovation, that these kind of innovations can only be realized if companies team up in sharing their data, so making sure that they can jointly use it. Of course, nobody wants to end up in a situation where the data is misused. And also, in order not to go through all of these examples, the general pattern is that ecosystems around data form for, as I said, making a collective use of the innovation potential of data. But on the other hand, every single participant must be ensured or assured that their data is not misused and not violating any legal provisions. Perhaps another pattern that I would like to mention, and I'm sure that has been addressed also earlier today, I believe that Mr. Hess was also in the program, is Manufacturing X, where multiple, also smaller companies team up in order to seize opportunities that come out that can be seized from using the data together, which no one could be realizing on their own. So as I said, there is a clear business rationale for forming data spaces, for sharing data in ecosystems. And I wanted to basically touch upon those because sometimes we get the impression that this is forgotten when data spaces are formed and data ecosystems are emerging. It is not an end in itself. Data ecosystems are realized for a purpose. As a side note, we study these patterns in the so-called Data Spaces Support Center that has been set up by the European Commission, which is an endeavor to, as basically the name tells us, to support the individual data space initiatives in Europe. And in this endeavor, we are also analyzing, as I said, the business rationale of data ecosystems. Talking about data spaces, it has been proven useful in the past to look at data spaces in, well, this architecture-like perspective. On top, you usually create data ecosystems. And let me also share one point with you. It is no coincidence that the term ecosystem has been borrowed by biology, because what we want to achieve is that the system as a whole is stable, perhaps also reaches equilibrium, so like in biology, But also, on the other hand, the individual members of the ecosystems are also better off when they join the ecosystem, right? So there is always the ambition to find the balance between the benefits of the individual participant and member of an ecosystem and the ecosystem as a whole. And if we stick for a moment with this analogy from biology, we also see that usually in ecosystems in biology, there is no central governance, right? If we imagine a pond, for example, outside the conference environment, there is a lot of, let's say, fish in a pond or frogs and also insects. And their population usually is, let's say, in equilibrium, right? So everybody finds their way. But there is, as I said, no central governance. And I would like to stress that because what we also see in data ecosystems is a tendency towards a higher degree of decentralization. So obviously, data ecosystems want to get rid of all sorts of, let's say, central coordination. Why is that? Well, okay, that's clear because central coordination always comes with a danger to a certain extent of, let's say, centralization of power when it comes to pooling data, which we do not want, and also power when it comes to, well, defining the rules of the game according to which the different ecosystems member play. The second layer then is represented by what we generally call the data space in a narrow sense. So the environment in which data can be shared, where also digital twins can be formed out of the data from different sources of different providers. And then, of course, since we talk about data that needs to rest in certain data storages, but also need to be shared, and also need to be accompanied with terms and conditions about the use of the data, which we call policies, we of course need to have a software infrastructure in place, which allows us to do that, to form the data space. And that is what we usually refer to a distributed data infrastructure. It is noteworthy to mention that, let's say, the business models on all these different levels are different. If we start again on the top, we see a variety of different individual business models. Usually there are, let's say, smaller startup companies that have a good idea, what they can do with let's say, combining data from different sources under making sure that data sovereignty of the data provider is ensured. But this is, let's say, as I said, an ecosystem which we don't want to control, but which we want to make flourishing, right? The data space authority or the owner of the data space is often also a joint venture, consortium, collaborative endeavor of different organizations. And I'm also sure that we have heard about Catena-X earlier today, and we will probably address it later on as well. And Catena-X as an association is a very good example where different partners from the automotive value chain team up in order to define their data space. But we also have seen that a first operating company has been created by 10 of these member companies in order to run the services that basically form the foundation of the Catena-X automotive network. And also this joint venture, which is called Cofinity-X, has been created by not only one company, but by 10 companies that team up, also competitors to a certain extent. But they have understood, they have seen that they are better off if they join forces because they are all confronted with the same challenges. And they are better off if they, as I said, bundle their resources and address the challenges together, in contrast to everybody trying on their own to overcome these challenges about transparency in the value chain, adherence to legal provisions, and so on and so forth. And on the lower level, on the lower layer, we usually have typical infrastructure as a service business models, which we know from cloud service providers for example, or in general also other IT service providers. And of course, they have an interest to scale. And that is also the reason why the providers of, let's say, the infrastructure services are interested in not only serving one data space, but multiple data spaces with a common set of services. And I will touch upon that a little bit later. So talking about the different roles in data spaces, it is also important to understand, as I briefly mentioned on the previous slide, that there is not the one business model of a data space. There is a business rationale, as I outlined in the first point, which is a reason why different organizations and companies team up in a data ecosystem. But as I said, a data ecosystem consists of a variety of different, well, companies, organizations, and also business models. I said that we usually find an operator of data space core services, which would be, let's say, the lowest layer on the chart before. And then we have a data space owner who basically makes sure that the rules of the game, the rules of participation, the governance of the data space, not only the governance of the data, but also the governance of the data space is put into place. And then we have depicted here in green a number of different roles. For example, we have data providers that use a data space as an opportunity to share their data. We have data app providers that basically enrich data quality, for example, or ensure data quality, or offer certain, let's call them, value-added data services. For example, they might also combine data from different services, and by doing so, come up with a richer data set as the original source. Most importantly, we have business app providers. In the case of Catena-X, for example, it's providers of traceability services or services to calculate the carbon footprint of a certain production and of a certain part which is required in the automotive value chain. And of course, on the other side, we have app users, so that make use of the app in order to calculate the individual carbon footprint of a certain instance of a part that has been produced in a dedicated production site on a dedicated production line, for example. And we have also, in general, data users that do whatever they want with the data if they stick to the conditions which are associated with the data and which determine, let's say, the conditions under which the data can be used. As I said, we typically use policies to do that. And that is, you can also refer to it as, let's say, being the terms and conditions in the data economy, if you like. And then we have providers of enabling services. This could be onboarding services, or also what we see right now in many cases is connector as a service models, because we see that in many cases you need a software component that is usually referred to as a data space connector, which needs to be run by the participant in order to make sure that data sources are connected, and that before data is shared, policies can be attached, as I said, to the data themselves. And this has been done by a software component called the data space connector. And many companies use service providers in order to run this software component for them. And if we look a little bit deeper into the specifics of the business model and the value that the data space provides for the different roles in the data space, we can see also a variety of different value contributions. For example, and I don't want to go through all of them in detail, for the data providers, we usually see that, let's say, a data space is a distribution channel, a sales channel, even in certain cases for the data. So they're saying, okay, if there is a data space to which I connect and I have certain data, if somebody else can make use of my data, I might be reimbursed and I might even earn money with it, right? And also, of course, it's a means for data sharing, as I said, in the cost sharing case, to team up. Yes, and for example, data app providers, they also see a data space as a distribution channel for their app services. And also they are better off because they can use the infrastructure services and scale, of course, their offering, right? This is similar to the app the app economies that we usually are well aware of when we interact in platform ecosystems for consumer services, be it, for example, Apple or Google. So, and we know that, let's say, the platform economics apply, for example, scaling, and that is also the case in the case of data spaces. Yes, and of course, the value of a data space for a data space owner is simply the fact that, well, I mean, that's the reason for a data space owner to exist, to make sure that this data space is up and running. And the interesting thing is that we need to put all these, let's say, preferences and business model requirements into balance. That is also why I made the reference to biology, where the notion of ecosystems was borrowed from. We need to make sure that everybody is better off and that all the individual business models are viable business models in a context where the ecosystem as such can flourish. And that is, let's say, in addition to, let's say, all the technical questions that we need to solve when we have to build a data space, for me, the more important question to make sure that the ecosystem as such can function. Right. So if we go down to, let's say, the key success factors to make that happen and to find this balance, you know, between the ecosystem level and the level of the individual business models, of course, there are a couple of, let's say, factors that we need to take into account. And we learned it over the last years when we established both data ecosystems in certain domains, like Catena-X, for example, or as I mentioned, manufacturing X is around the corner to address the manufacturing industries on an international scale. That's very important. These both initiatives are no German or European initiatives, but truly global ones. And I'm sure that Mr. Hess also outlined that earlier on. But in all cases, what we see is of great importance is as a success factor, trust. So I recently heard in a conference similar to this, this nice saying that data travels at the speed of trust, and I like that very much. And we can identify, let's say, two perspectives on trust. And this is what I want to briefly outline in order not too much stretch my time here. First of all, it's trust among the participants. Ecosystems are no closed shops. So there are companies that we haven't made business with in the past. So we want to trust them anyway. So we need to find technology and put technology into place that ensures trust among the participants in a data space. And on the other hand, it's about trust in the data and in the use of the data. And we have created two initiatives which are also international. Trust among participants is something which Gaia-X is dealing with. And trust in the data and in the use of data is the key idea of the IDS Association, which also is very glad that we also have a number of partners from Japan, for example, and also close relationships with RRI, but also with other initiatives in Japan, which is very fruitful and very mature, I must say. And I would take the opportunity to thank also the Japanese participants in the audience for this trustworthy collaboration at this point of time. Yes, talking about the evolution of data spaces, I mentioned that briefly, but I don't want to spend too much time. Right now, we are, I would say, in the second stage where we form open ecosystems, and I mentioned a couple of those. But what we see coming up at the horizon is, let's say, also the federation of different ecosystems. And what we need to make sure is that also ecosystems and the underlying data spaces are interoperable. And that is why it's so important that we use the same standards for publishing data in a catalog for defining policies that we attach to the data and so on and so forth, because otherwise we would end up in ecosystem silos, and that is not what we want. So closing, I would like to share this proverb with you that obviously comes from Africa. I'm not sure whether that is correct, but I like this proverb anyway. So this basically says, I mean, if you want to go fast, then go alone. But if you want to go far, then team up and go together. And with that, I would like to close my little talk, and I thank you very much for your attention. I'm very glad to be part of this session today. I'm looking very much forward to also the other speakers and the panel discussion that we have later on. And please take my apologies for the technical issues in the beginning. So it was a little bit hard for me to talk while always hearing, let's say, the English translation. Thank you very much.
はい。オット先生、ありがとうございました。こちらもいろいろ不手際があって申し訳ありませんでした。さて、それでは、2件目のご講演でございますが、東京大学の越塚先生でございます。タイトルは、日本のデータ基盤及びデータ利活用の現状と展望ということでお願いしたいと思います。よろしくお願いします。
はい、ただいまご紹介いただきました東京大学の越塚と申します。こういう場ですと英語で話すことが多いんですが、あまり僕英語うまくないので海外の方に日本語で同時通訳でちゃんと英語のうまい方に英語にしていただける機会っていうのが実はあんまりないので、貴重な機会なので、僕どうしても英語が下手なので、英語でプレゼンテーションするとなんか We have なんとかありますよとか、なんか This is important とか important 言ってるだけで終わっちゃうことが多いので、少し難しい話ができればいいなと、思っています。それで、そうですね。で、今日は話は、データのことを最近話すことは非常に多いので、アップトゥデートというか最近の、状況を、少し感想も含めて、お話をしたいと思います。で、自己紹介、そうですね。今私東京大学におりまして、データ社会推進協議会 DSA、データソサエティアライアンスですね。で、データ EX 提案をして今進めております。それだけではなくて、グリーンバイデジタルコンソーシアム、グリーンとデジタルの方のチェアマンもやっております。それとかあと気象ですね、ウェザーデータの団体でありますとか、いろいろそのデータのことに関しては国内でいろいろさせていただいています。それで最近のデータインフラの状況を見ていてすごく最近思うことなんですけれども、とにかくねスロー遅い。データのね関係のね動きが遅い。デジタル分野なんだけど遅いと思ってまして、これ僕もうすぐリタイアしちゃうので僕がリタイアするまでに大学とかで定年が来る前に本当に決着がつくんだろうかというような気がしていて、で自分が日本で、データって昔からとても重要だったとは思うんですけれども、おそらく政府も含めてその重大さっていうのを非常に痛感したのは、実は十数年前の3.11 の東日本大震災の時、あれが非常に大きなきっかけになってたと思います。日本の場合はですね、なぜかというと災害が大規模災害、日本全体を襲うような大規模災害があった時に、それに対応するためにはいろんな団体がやはり連携していかなければいけないという時に、実はその 3.11 の時は全くデータで連携ができなかったと。被災者、災害に遭った方ですね、それの名簿ネームリストを作ることすらできなかったと。自治体ごとに、いわゆるキャラクターコードが違う今信じられないことですけど、ドイツの方がしたら何言ってんだこいつって思うかもしれませんけど、自治体ごとに、 ローカルガバメントごとにですね、シティごとに、住んでるピープルのですね、人々の文字コード、キャラクターコードが違うんですよ。だから、隣の自治体、隣のシティと一緒に、被害に遭った人の名簿を作ることすらできなかったと。AI だとかなんだかんだ IoT だ、難しいことはたくさん言ってるんですけど、そんなことすらできなかったんですね。でそれが10年前ですね。でそれでデータの共通とか共有とか、流通とかしっかりやらなくちゃいけないなっていうのが10年前で、そこから日本の多くのデータ政策が始まり、法律もたくさん作られて、例えば自治体が、データオープンデータすることはこれも法律で義務付けられるようになってきてますと。そういうのも10年ぐらい前から始まりました。でその当時から僕も関わってるんですけれども、10年間経って決してデグレードはしてないんだけど、少しずつこう成長してるんですけど、データの分野って。ただ遅いですね。これがゆっくりいっていると。で片や一番クイックなものは何かって言ったらやっぱり AI ですよね。マシンラーニングとかディープラーニングとか最近の、ジェネレーティブ AI と言われる分野の、立ち上がり方はすごい。やっぱりあっという間にビジネスにもなるし、あっという間に世界的にも普及していきますと。これ例えば若者の気分になって、私の大学の学生からするとどっちが魅力的かって言われたら、データの分野と AI とどっちが魅力的なんだって言ったら、もう絶対全員ほぼ 100% AI って言っちゃいますね。なんてかって言ったら AI なら明日億万長者になれるかもしれない。それぐらいベンチャービジネスもあっという間に成功します。なんだけども分野がやっぱり違うんですよね。やっぱり AI とデータっていうのは同じデジタルが非常に深く関係する分野なんですけれども、やっぱり分野が全然やっぱり違うっていうこと、やっぱりデータっていうのは少しずつこう進んでいく、少しこのゆっくりって今日スローって僕言ったのは、実は日本のローカルな事情なのかグローバルな事情なのか、それはよくちょっと分かりません。もしかしたら日本だけだったら日本はとってもまずい状態なんですけれども、ただそういう印象を持ってますが、ただ着実に少しずつ、今日の自分もスライドを作りながら、10年前のスライドと比べるとやっぱり全然違うんですよね。だからそういう意味では進展しているかなとは思います。そういった中で少し最近の、日本の状況といったことも含めて、お話をしたいと思いますけれども、これちょっと細かい非常にビジーな図で申し訳ありませんけれども、じゃあ日本 EU、US とデータの分野って、それこそルールからデータスペースのレイヤーからデータプラットフォームとかツールのレイヤーからデータモデル、データのクオリティ、いろんなフレームワーク、いろんなレイヤーがあって、それぞれ全て取り組みがありますね。それで私どもから見ていると EU の取り組みというのは非常に体系的に、さすがヨーロッパだなという感じで綺麗に体系的にできているななんですが、やっぱりヨーロッパの大陸側の文化っていうのはとってもトップダウンな感じがあります。だけど日本っていうのはおそらく最もボトムアップな国で物事をボトムアップに考える国だっていうのがあって、なかなか整理ができてない。すいません。でこの中に今日の講演にある経済産業省さんのウラノスをちょっと書けてなかったので、ウラノスどこに書こうかなと思って悩んだんですけど、ウラノスちょっと書くところがちょっとうまく整理できなかったので、ちょっと変な斜めにウラノス書いてありますけど、すいません。ただそういう動きもどんどん起こってきてて、そういう意味では先ほどスローっていうのはちょっと半分訂正した方がいいのかなという気もしています。それで、日本の国内の事情でも申しますと、ドメインスペシフィックなデータのプラットフォームとか、それをデータスペースと、ヨーロッパの皆さんがデータスペースって呼ぶようなものになっているのかと言われると、ちょっと若干違うかもしれません。ただの技術的なプラットフォームだけかもしれません。ビジネスモデルがついてないかもしれません。ですけれども、そういうそのドメインスペシフィックなものっていうのは相当日本の中ではデータのプラットフォームはあるなと思っています。で今おそらく日本の中だとデータスペースやデータプラットフォームを整理するとレイヤーが多分3つに分かれていると思います。 3レイヤーあって、で最初のレイヤーですね、ファーストレイヤーはドメインスペシフィックなデータプラットフォームのレイヤーが今これでいうと少し縦に長くなっているところですね。でそこにものすごくたくさんの、この後ちょっといろいろ紹介させていただきますけれども、いろんなデータをシェアリングしたりディストリビューションしたりそういうプラットフォームがあります。でかたやそういうのがたくさんある、多分100以上あるんじゃないかと思うんですね。そういうのが私が知ってるだけでももう何十個も立ち上がってますし、私もそういうの何十個も関わってるんですけれども、それでじゃあそれらを全部つなぎましょうと、分野を完全に超えて、それこそまさにザ・ジャパンデータスペースみたいなものを作りましょうみたいなことになってる取り組みというのは、それこそ私どものデータ EXでありますとか、また国の SIP のプロジェクトの中で、作られてきた JATE と言われるものがそのシステムに相当するわけですけれども、そういう取り組みもありました。でただ今は多分もうちょっとその真ん中のレイヤー、セカンドレイヤーがおそらくあって、ある程度の分野に関しては共通的に、製造業なら製造業、製造業の中でね、また自動車とか宇宙とか、ケミストリーとか、スティールとか、いろんな分野があるわけです。でその分野ごとにまたデータ基盤はあるわけですけれども、じゃあ製造業とかサプライチェーンということだけでやっぱりもう少し分野を横断したものが欲しいなとか、自治体全部ローカルガバメントは全部じゃあ一緒にしようとか、それぐらいの、セカンドレイヤーのところも今盛んに、作られているかなというふうに思います。そのような感じで、右側はそのプラットフォームとかそういったもののものですけれども、そういったものだけでなくてサービスとかルールとかですね、そういうこと、あと国際連携もしていかなきゃいけないということで、日本全体の体系がこうできてきているかなというふうに。でこうやって多分日本の場合はですね、絵に描かないので、あんまり皆さんが綺麗な絵、日本の人は描かないので、なんとなく日本っていうなんか何にもないような感じがするんですけど、結構ね頑張って絵を描こうと思って描いてみると意外とね取り組みがあるので、これらを一生懸命こう体系立てて整理して、ワンチームにね、日本そんなに大きい国じゃないですから、ワンチームにしてデータにやって進めていくことが重要だろうなと思います。それで、10年ぐらい前から私も関わって始めたナショナルガバメント、国の、オープンデータですね、これも着々と成長を遂げ、今2万2000のデータセットを公開するところになっています。それと日本の場合、やはりやりだすと日本人真面目だなと、ドイツの方もとっても真面目だと思うんですけど日本の方も真面目だなと思うのは、ローカルガバメントもね、オープンデータやろうっていうふうに法律で決まったら、日本にはローカルガバメントが1788あります。1788もあるんですけど、そのうちすでにもう1450のローカルガバメントはオープンデータをやっています。ですので日本にはパブリックオープンデータサイト、パブリックオープンデータカタログが1500ぐらいあります。すでに1000だからものすごい数があるので、もうどこにカタログがあるのかすらもわからないぐらいカタログがあるというようなところまで成長してきて、これ全てのローカルガバメントのうちの81%、多分人口だけのカバー率で言ったら 99% 近くいってると思いますの自治体がもうすでに実はオープンデータをやってるというところに来ています。であといろんなものがあります。最近めぼしいものですとプラトーっていう、これは日本の都市の建物を含めた 3D データをオープンデータにするというもので、東京ですとほぼ全ての東京が 3D ですね、でデータがあるっていう、これ世界でもめったにない、この東京ぐらいのこの規模でやってるっていうのはないんじゃないかなと。でこれがあるとですね、ちょっと面白くて、私の研究室今やってるのがこのプラトーのデータをね 3D プリンターにかけるんですよそうすると東京の立体模型作れますね。ただものすごいお金かかりますけどできます。でそんなのも揃ってきてますし、で国土交通関係のもの、モビリティとかですね、インフラストラクチャーに関してもだいぶできてます。で防災はすごい、防災はたくさんあります。災害関係ですね、ディサスター関係の、基盤、これもただ日本は防災って言っても災害がね種類もね数もね多すぎるので、雨もあれば雪もある、 台風もあれば雪もあって地震もあれば火山もある全部あるっていうところなので、原子力まで災害出てしまいましたので、それらでものすごいたくさんの量の情報とかやらなきゃいけないことっていうのも、データの整備もどんどん進められています。例えば今検討されていることですと、緊急地震速報っていうのがありますよね。今日本ですと地震が起きますと、波が来て揺れる前にスマートフォンに連絡が来ます。ピピピッとなります。これは日本中にものすごいたくさんの地震センサーが、ネットワークの IoT センサーが張り巡らされています。でそれがリアルタイムにデータを観測し、でスーパーコンピューターで計算をして、それで震源地と大きさを突き止めます。でその震源地と大きさでその地震があると、日本の地盤のデータを使って地震のシミュレーションを行います。で地震のシミュレーションを行って、震源地がここでこれだけの大きさだと、そうすると東京はこれから何十秒後にどれぐらいの震度で揺れるっていう計算をあっという間に行います。これが1秒2秒の世界です。でそれで行って、ここでピピピとなるわけです。で通知をするんですけれども、今はもうその子はピピピとなるだけではなくて、これにマシンを連動して、例えば新幹線を止める、揺れる前にもう地震が来る30秒前に新幹線は止める、エレベーターも止める、そういうオートマティックな仕組みも今どんどん作られようとしています。でそういう意味ではデータを使っていく、連携させていくってことに関しては、特定の分野かもしれませんけれども、かなり実は日本は進んだことをやっているということは、日本人自身が知った方がいいんではないかなというふうに思います。それであとこれ農業ですね。農業もやってますし、これはグリーン関係のところですね、もやってます。であとは日本は、ローカルガバメントもすごい頑張っていまして、これは東京メトロポリタンガバメントですね。東京都は日本の10分の1ぐらいありますので、一つの国ぐらいの大きさがあります。でそこが今東京データプラットフォーム、東京データハイウェイプランっていうのがあって、そこの中で、東京のデータプラットフォームを盛んに作って、今年これがランチすることになっています。で東京といえば大阪、大阪今度万国博覧会がありますので、それに目指して、大阪のデータプラットフォームオールデンというものをどんどん開発しています。でローカルガバメントというと他には地味なんですけど、これ高知県ですね、農業、温室農業ですね、グリーンハウスでは日本一ですので、そこのグリーンハウスのデータプラットフォームであるとか、これフィッシャリーですね、漁業のデータプラットフォーム、こういったものもすでに実用化されていて、漁師の方々、船に乗る方々はこのデータプラットフォームを見て、気象の状況とか海の状況、魚がどこにいるっていうのデータを見て、船を出すということっていうのはもう当然のように今は行われていますので、こういうのが進んで、そうか、もうそろそろなんですね。いかん、ちょっとスライド全然進んでないねまずいね。それで、でデータ EX、それでそういうのを取りまとめようというので、これデータ EX やってるということですね。で少しですね、新しいプロジェクトでいうと、私どもですね、今度 SIP という国の大きなプロジェクトで、モビリティの、データスペースを作ろうというプロジェクトが5年プロジェクトで、比較的国の大きな研究予算がついて、始めています。日本はこれ、MaaS のアプリケーションですけれども、公共交通に関しては、モビリティアザーサービスの、アプリケーションがたくさんもう所要のものができています。でそれのベースになるためのデータプラットフォームとして、GTFS-JP というこれ標準データフォーマットがきちっと定められ、これでバスのデータとか、これヨーロッパと若干違うのは、ヨーロッパはパブリックトランスポーテーションは比較的ガバメント、ローカルガバメントがやると思います。日本の場合は全て民間会社です。なので非常に小さい会社がたくさん公共交通を担っています。でそれを全部つないでこういったMaaSのサービスにしていくわけですけれども、で他にももちろん自動車とか航空機とかいろんなモビリティがありますので、もうすでにモビリティ関係のデータプラットフォームが数えきれないぐらいあるので、それを一元的にまとめてより高い付加価値をまた出していこうというのを、これ5年計画で今年から始めるということで、これのリーダー私務めているんですけれども、始めています。それとあと今度ちょっとアカデミアの方ではこれ東京大学私のところですけれども、少しこういったデータプラットフォームに ドイツは素晴らしいと思うのは、やはりフランホーファーがかなり貢献されて作ってますけれども、今まで日本だと東京大学とかですね、大学があまりこういったことに貢献できてなかったので、しっかりとテストベッド、しかもこのテクノロジーレイヤーのコラボレーションとかそういうことができるテストベッドを作ろうということで、日本で開発した JAD のシステムのテストベッド、誰でもエンジニアの人が今すぐ使いたいと、コネクターってちょっと試してみたいと、今すぐこれデータ交換してみたいっていう実験してみたい、そういうエンジニアがいたら明日からでもすぐ触ってくださいと、すぐ使えますよという環境をやっぱり提供するのは大学の役割だろうと思って、そこができてなかったので、東京大学の中にその JAD のテストベッドと、あとこの後ちょっとお話ししますけれども、IDSA と MOU をこれから結んでジャパンリサーチラボを作りますので、その役割として IDSA のシステムのテストベッドも東京大学の中に作る予定です。それとあとファイウェアのテストベッドも作る予定です。そうすると日本とヨーロッパの IDSA のテストベッドとファイウェアのテストベッドができますから、これのインターオペラビリティをどうするかという実験も我が東京大学の中でできるようになりますので、こういったことを今年は進めていきます。それでもう JAD に関しましては東京大学で東京大学版 JAD っていうのが動いておりまして、学内ではもう実験を全然できるようになっています。でそういったアプリケーションですね、データを使ったアプリケーションは日本の中ではもう時間来ているのでどんどん飛ばしますけど、いろんなものがもうすでに多く立ち上がってきています。それで日本でもしもどんなデータを使ったサービスがあるのかっていうのは、これがまた日本のガバメントも真面目にこういうデータをたくさん集めますので、デジタル庁さんの方が、デジタル田園都市国家構想の中で、できてきたいろんなサービスを全部辞書のようにしてますし、以前からオープンデータを使ったいろんなサービスもディクショナリーのようになってますので、この辺皆さん産業の方を見ていただければ、データを使ったこんなサービスがあるんだって作れるんだっていうことのほぼ全てのカタログはここに挙げられてるんじゃないかなと思います。であとこの後重要なのは、特に今日はドイツの皆様との、会合ですので、インターナショナルコラボレーションがとても重要だというふうに思います。私の DSA データソサエティアライアンスの方はすでに、ファイウェアファウンデーションと、IDSA、Gaia-X と、MOU を結んで、おります。で、それだけではなくて、この前 G7 では、我が国から提案している DFFT、これをしっかり進めていこうと、日本も貢献するということ、IAPという組織をきちっと作って国際データ流通をやっていきましょうということをやりました。でそこの中に、どういう機能をその IAP に持たせるべきかということで、これも、日欧米の皆様に集まっていただいて、こういうことが必要だという11個の提言をまとめまして、実はこれ今年の5月に G7 の方に提出もいたしましたし、でその内容に関してはワールドエコノミーフォーラムの中でこういったレポートにもなっている、ますます国際的なデータの流通をやっていく必要が、これから進めていく必要があろうというふうに思います。それで最後、この今日ドイツの皆様ですので IDSA ジャパンハブ、今年の11月に設立する、来月です、予定でございます。東京大学の中に IDSA ハブコーディネーターの機能と IDSA リサーチラボラトリー、この2つの組織を作りまして、データ EX とも連携し、ちょっと右側がこれから IPA さんとデジタル庁さんと連携しながらやっていくということで、こうロゴも書かさせていただきますけれども、先ほどのようなそれぞれのテクノロジーのインターオペラビリティの実証実験とかですね、そういうこともここの中でこの後進めていきたいと、東京大学としてもやっていきたいというふうに思っているというところでございます。だいぶちょっと長くなってすいません。以上でございます。ありがとうございました。
はい、越塚先生どうもありがとうございました。それでは3件目の講演に入りたいと思います。3件目はアメリカデジタルツインコンソーシアムのアイザック様でございます。講演タイトルはデジタルツインのグローバル状況とそれから事例ということになります。アイザック様もアメリカからオンラインで入っていただきます。Please presentation, Isaac.
So thank you again for inviting me. I hope also next time I will be able to be there in person. But again, thank you for the opportunity. So I figured first off, I would give a little bit background about what the Digital Twin Consortium is all about, and then we will look at how we operate, and then some example use cases, I think directly relevant to some of the things you've heard through the sessions today. Many people don't realize, but the Digital Twin Consortium is actually one of seven other consortia under the Object Management Group umbrella, which was started a little over 30 years ago as a standards organization. So it is a true SDO, and many standards such as UML, Unified Modeling Language, SysML, System Modeling Language, Unified Architecture Framework. Many standards have come forth as a result of that, and several of those have also become ISO ratified. Here you can see the nature of the different consortium that we have under the umbrella. And when you look at this from a progression of technology and capabilities, you can see how through this alignment, you can actually truly obtain true sustainable digital transformation. And really looking at the Digital Twin Consortium, looking at how we can provide opportunities in a collaborative environment to really not just bring about the awareness and cut through the hype of what a digital twin is and the value, but actually look at it from the perspective of really what are the main areas of focus, especially in terms of understanding the foundational elements of a digital twin, and then being able to bring that through consistent approaches, even open source. We have an open source collaboration community to not just drive the awareness, but to accelerate the adoption of digital twin and enabling technology. And that's as it relates to policy, security, interoperability, and even overall development. And this is done through partnership, through these collaborations between industry, academia, and government in this collaborative environment. A little background. Our steering committee members, very diverse. Our membership, very diverse and continues to grow. We're over 150 members to date. And it's comprised of not just the researchers and the technology providers, academia, local government, but also it's about the end users. And you can see here, the end users become that catalyst for bringing forward and driving use cases in these highly collaborative engagements and opportunities. And we'll talk about some of those further in the presentation. But you can see here the examples of our end users or members working directly with end users that really demonstrate through real-world applications the value a digital twin can provide. And just to set the stage, really, the very first thing we did was we wanted to identify what are those key elements of a digital twin, of a true digital twin. And through the consensus of the membership and then approved through the steering committee and brought forward, you can see here in this example, it's illustrating that a digital twin is a virtualization of a physical entity, in this case, remote wind farm, and or process. Think about supply chain management, operational resiliency. But the key is that synchronization. You can see that synchronization to allow the data from the real world entity or process to be provided back at a given frequency, often referred to as a twinning rate, as you see. So there's a synchronization mechanism to provide that data back, but that data then serves as actionable insight to be able to provide the ability to optimize or to increase the productivity or to prevent unplanned downtime, a whole myriad of things to be able to forecast that future event where digital twin effectively provides a crystal ball. And that's based on information that's happened in the past. So that's the historical data, based on the current data, the event intelligence or situational awareness, as well as being able to now simulate and predict with that highest level of confidence that outcome or that optimization, because you're looking at a holistic view from that data. We've heard about the importance of interoperability. We've heard about the importance of data. Data is the lifeblood of the digital twin. And the digital twin is a key enabler to digital transformation. So those elements, again, the virtualization, and this is actually captured at a real instance. So this wind farm exists. The data that is captured then provides that actionable insight to be able to optimize the output, whether that's increasing the efficiency or protection or preventing a situation that might occur into a catastrophic failure. But you can see what the digital twin, a true digital twin by this definition, is a closed loop. And some of the primary focuses of this consortium is really to how can we improve that interoperability? How can we accelerate the market by demonstrating through real-world applications the value at the different life cycle phases of the digital twin? So how do we accomplish this? We have here our working groups. So you can see we have 12 working groups. These are all member-driven, and they communicate and work together in a very collaborative manner between each other, because areas and technologies and capabilities between some of these working groups now pass to the others. And you could imagine, and in the middle is what we call our capabilities and technologies. So think about the vertical segments on the outside in blue, now represented through a horizontal layer, which is that capabilities and technology. Think about things like security and trustworthiness, reliability, operational resiliency, safety, functional safety. And when you're dealing with healthcare and life sciences, certainly the privacy of the data comes into play. So this is the structure of our consortium. Every one of these working groups is driven by our members. We started with 4 about 3 years ago, and that was manufacturing, that was natural resources, aerospace and defense, as well as infrastructure, which has now moved into AECO, architecture, engineering, construction, operations, and mobility and transportation. So separating out those different elements. And that provides even greater flexibility. And you saw some of the examples in terms of transportation aspects and the importance to Japan and how they're looking at that. So being able to have this wide breadth of coverage, we're able to look at it in the context of different subgroups and focused areas. And what we're able to do through this is identify areas that are fundamental, again, towards understanding a digital twin and how you go about starting the journey and what are the best approaches to take. And so through one of these areas, and this was actually based on one of our members' discussions with their customers, they came out with this idea of we compose a digital twin, this composability framework, based on a very familiar format. And you look at it in terms of, first, what is the objective of the digital twin? Don't look at it in terms of just the data itself or an implementation that you have in mind, but look at it in terms of what is that objective? And then what are the capabilities necessary to complete that objective? And then from that point, then you can look at what is the optimal technology to accomplish that. Then from there, look at the data that you have and identify whether or not you need to have additional data for more accuracy or precision, more synthetic data or real-world data you can now bring together to really complement that understanding. And then from there, understand what that implementation might look like. So within the consortium, we have put together these types of frameworks, which includes both the capabilities technology. This was in a very familiar format, a periodic table, replace the elements with these capabilities. And then also look at it in the context of a complete or full stack framework, an architectural framework to incorporate those different areas and look at that from the foundational aspect, which has to start with the security and the trustworthiness of that data. If you don't have that secure understanding of that data itself, then the whole underpinnings of what you have built are in question. And then look at that in terms of qualifying and verifying, modeling and simulating, and then with a stress on interoperability, as we've talked about, when you think especially about scaling from a smart building to a smart city, and then scaling that to a smart country. How do you ensure the flow of that data is available? And then through that, we also look at it in terms of how do we demonstrate that value? We demonstrate it through use cases and case studies that, again, show that value at the different phases of the life cycle. And that's what we have released as our technology showcase. As I said, we also have our open source collaboration community, of which some of these use cases and case studies are part of that. Here's an example of the capabilities, the periodic table. You can see the structure, the organization, and this was the very beginning of this. Over thousands of downloads. We're now working on the next version of this, and one of our members has actually automated this and be able to operationalize this. So we created an entire toolkit. And if you haven't gone to our website, digitaltwinconsortium.org, you can download the toolkit there. I highly encourage you to take a look and understand from much more detail than what I'm able to go into this very high-level overview. And within those different working groups, those vertical focused areas, we have subgroups. And from these subgroups, that's where the work product really happens. That's where it gets developed and then reviewed and then released. So we have papers on reality capture, building performance in the context of environmental aspects and carbon reporting, precision agriculture, power system subgroups that are working across the board, and how do you ensure the safety of the power and the operation of the grid itself through decentralization. You can see several of the different areas, additive manufacturing, looking at that also in terms of industrial automation. And how do you bring that about and also look at it from a packaging environment? There's the mobility and transportation, which is truly a traditional hub and spoke approach, where anything with the word port is your transportation hub, a seaport, a maritime port, a airport. And then the spokes are the corridors, the waterways, the airways, the byways, the roads, the bridges, the tunnels. And we have members involved in all of these different areas. And of course, supply chain management is very, very important. And then we have a very strong academia and research working group looking at different types of grants available, different training and accreditation programs, and then participation to, again, help to spread the awareness, but also to accelerate that adoption. And this is within the research working group. We have both, we have 4 different subgroups, and we continue to build those out in terms of being able to address the knowledge gap, the skills, and look to that workforce shortage through educational awareness, different programs, and then different opportunities in terms of research grants, as you see some examples through here. We're also now working through our members to, again, increase that awareness is through creating and developing a book based on the work product, based on our members' expertise, experience, background in developing, in deploying, operating, maintaining digital twins. I strongly state that there is no other consortium in the world like this that has that breadth and depth and level of expertise. And here, example again, looking at that platform stack and looking at those different areas and fundamental to that, allowing a consistency in terms of the way we bring out the use cases and case studies that are also under our initiatives tab on our webpage. You can see several different areas, white papers, user guides, quite a bit of material that we have, but we don't just stop with the membership there. We look to accelerate these business outcomes and develop these best practices and bring out the thought leadership of the consortium and showcase it through these real world examples and give that expert guidance from these lessons learned so they don't get repeated. So you don't have to have this duplication of effort, but you can accelerate that adoption. And so here you can see our regional branch coverage of the consortium, where effectively a regional branch organizer is a member of the consortium, and they have close ties to academia, to local government, because of the regulations that come out, the mandates, the directives, but also access and working with the incubators, the accelerators, and the innovators. So by the end of this year, we will have a regional branch organizer in every major continent of the world. And you can see in some of the countries, we actually have much more coverage. And we are now launching our regional branch organization in Japan through DXIA and Yoshino-san, and that's how we got this invitation. So much appreciated again. But we don't just stop there. We also reach out and work with several other organizations that are alliances or consortiums themselves, helping to look at the way the data is managed, make sure we understand those fundamental aspects, and really, again, accelerate that adoption through this common understanding. Every one of these liaisons that you see here they were brought forward by the members of the consortium. As I said, this is a member-driven organization, and we have projects working within our consortia, community of consortia that are under the OMG, Object Management Group umbrella. But we also have many projects with the other liaisons in process right now. And I think you also, as I saw, FIWARE was there, working with them. OPC Foundation, I think they have over 800 members themselves. So we have activities going on in many of these areas. And that, again, extends the ecosystem. And some of our own initiatives I talked about. We have a technology spotlight, which then leads to a showcase, which is a use case or case study to demonstrate that value. And then we bring that out even further through webinars, and that brings that awareness, and it actually brings other companies to look and say, you know, this makes a lot of sense to us. This resonates very well. We want to be a part of this consortium. We don't want to be outside looking in. We want to be helping to drive and really develop and build that out and become that thought leadership. So we have our technology showcase. As I said, this is live on our website, and you can see what's been published, but look at all these that are in process. You know, roughly every 3 weeks, we will be bringing out a new digital twin use case or case study to demonstrate that value. And these are real world applications. So within the consortium, the opportunity for the innovation to showcase the thought leadership, to collaborate together, and to bring that authority and to help to drive new opportunities and even new businesses. That's what this consortium is about. So thank you very much for your time.
アイザック様、ありがとうございました。それでは、これから。
どうもありがとう。
Thank you。そう、これからですね、パネルディスカッションに入りたいと思います。壇上の方に、越塚先生と、それから、バンシェンさんお上がりいただければと思います。あと今ご講演いただきましたお二人はオンラインで、ご参加いただければと思います。じゃあ改めまして、登壇者をご紹介いたします。フランホーファーのオットー先生です。それから、インダストリー 4.0 の事務局長であるバンシェンさんにもご登壇いただくことになります。それから、東京大学の越塚先生、そして、先ほどご講演いただきましたデジタルツインコンソーシアムのアイザック様、アメリカからオンラインで参加いただいております。それではディスカッションの方に短い時間ですが入りたいと思います。まず午前中にはデータ連携の基盤というのはどういうふうに作られてくるかという話と、午後にはそれを使ったアプリケーションというかですね、価値の創造というところについて、いろいろな事例を含めてご紹介いただいたと思います。で、そういった中で、特にインダストリー 4.0 に関してはもう10年以上前からですね、いろいろ計画されて、先ほどご講演にもありました通り、長年ですね、着実に進めてこられて、最近ではCatena-XであるとかGaia-Xといったアプリケーションがやっと出てくるようになってきたというところではあると思うんですが、一方ですね、世の中としては当時から比べるとだいぶ状況が変わったことがあるかなと思っていて、そこら辺についての考え方について今日はいろいろご意見をいただきたいなと思っています。2点、状況変化については考えておりまして、一つは世界の状況、国際情勢がですね、当時は多分非常に自由な環境だったと思うんですけれども、最近、アメリカと中国の問題があったかなと思っていたらですね、最近ではウクライナの問題なんかも起こっているというようなこともあり、かなりそのオープンな交流というのが難しくなってきたような 気もするんですが、そういった環境の中で、これまでのビジョンが変わっていくのか変わるのか、あるいはどのようになるのかという点と、それからあとやる内容について、開発内容が順番が変わってくるのかどうかということを考えてみたらどうかなというふうなことを議論できたらなと思っています。でもう一つは、技術の環境ですね。っていうので、多少予想はされていたかもしれませんが、最近非常に発展している生成系 AI に関する技術の大幅な発展ということで、やっぱりそのビジョンであるとか、あるいは順番、やり方の順番なんかが当初考えていたよりも変わるのかどうかみたいなあたりについて、それぞれの立場でですね、ご意見をいただけたらなと思っております。ということで、まず最初に国際情勢をベースにして、ビジョンがどのように変わるのか、あるいは変えるのか、あるいは変わらないのかというあたりについて、最初にオットー先生の方からコメントをいただけたらなと思います。
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, very important points that you mentioned. And if we look into the international landscape, how that changed, let me perhaps share two thoughts with you. I think we have, over the last recent years, seen that there are, let's say, a growing number of, let's say, grand challenges that everyone has to tackle, be it in Europe or in Japan or in the US. And I think it's clear to everybody that these challenges cannot be addressed by single players on their own, but we have to team up. If I, for example, think of climate change, this is something which no country, no company can, of course, address on their own. And one strand to approach these challenges is, for example, to embark into a wider adoption of the circular economy, right? In order to reduce our resource consumption and make sure that we basically make reuse of the resources, of the scarce resources that we use. And that is also one of the drivers, and I'm sure that Hagen Heubach earlier today has mentioned this when he talked about Catena-X, where it's not just an opportunity for, let's say, different players in the value chain to team up, but it's really a necessity. And I think this is even aggravated because time's running out, right? I mean, we have climate protection goals in Germany and Europe, and I believe also across the world, that are not so far in the future to be reached. We talk about 2030. So there must be a concerted and joint endeavor to really make a change in the way we run business. And I believe that data ecosystems are not the single, of course, solution to achieve these goals, but they are a fundamental enabler and a key pillar in order to embark into this journey, for example, towards climate neutrality. The other thing that I'd like to mention when we talk about this first question is that we see a more complex international environment. I think that we will not basically isolate our economies once more. We will have international collaboration and international value chains also in the future, but the world is going to be more complex, I would think, because due to two things that I'd like to point out. First, in terms of, say, higher resilience, countries and companies alike try to, of course, spread their risk exposure. So that means that they would rather not, let's say, reduce the number of relationships that they have, but rather increase them in order basically to, as I say, for example, reduce the risk of running out of certain, let's say, material supply from one country or from one supplier. So we will end up with a even higher number of relationships to maintain. And the other thing is that we also, in these, let's say, international relationships, we see a growing number of data regulation, right? If I look into Europe, for example, the European Commission has been very productive when it comes to issuing legal provisions for the use of data. If I think of the Data Governance Act or the Data Act, which is upcoming. But the same happens also elsewhere on this planet. For example, in China, we have also data regulation, and in Japan as well. And what we need to make sure is when we share data across, let's say, borders or across, let's say, the boundaries of individual economic areas, that we make sure that we adhere to the legal provisions in one area, but also in the other, right? And that will not be possible on a manual basis. So we need to have technology into place. We need to put technology into place, which allows us to be compliant to a certain extent automatically. At least that's my vision, and also point us to conflicts in, let's say, the different regulations. So for us as a community, there remains many things to do, but life's probably not getting easier.
ありがとうございます。インダストリー 4.0 の観点からバンシェンさん何か補足することがあればお願いいたします。
Thank you. And thank you for having me here. Yeah, it's a very good question, and perhaps I'll start answering by sort of giving a little sketch of the strategy we gave us actually many years ago, like 5 years ago, and also which goes back to the very start 10 years ago of the platform Industrie 4.0. And there were 3 core notions to our work. The one was the autonomy, so to be in a position to, in a sovereign state, decide what technologies, for example, would you use and would you implement. The other core notion was interoperability. So to have, as we have heard often today, the means to actually collaborate internationally on a technical basis. And the third item was sustainability, also looking at issues like climate change. So remembering to that basic strategy we gave us, and back to your question, Murakami-san, I think the really aggravated situation we're in on an international level, in a way it actually shows that the basic pillars of our strategy were well chosen, because as we see in the current developments, it's exactly these pillars we need to build on to be in a good position to actually react to the challenges we're facing. Boris Otto has just nicely laid them out. So it is about the climate crisis, but which also initiates a migration crisis, which will come up. So this means that the international world will be more and more destabilized. So the way how we can manage our supply chains, for example, or how we organize R&D on a global level, this will become more challenging. But also, I mean, these are sort of the overall trends we're having on a political level, but then looking at the market space, here as well, you see developments who are rather protectionism, who go in that direction, but others who build on very dominant market forces in terms of monopolies being supported, be it state-wise or by just very, very large economic players. This, again, is a considerable risk to the way of, for our understanding of a free economic level playing field would look like. So here again, coming back to your question, I think, yes, there are these very new and grand challenges we're facing. But I think that the topics we have discussed today do direct in the right direction on how we can actually counter these developments.
ありがとうございます。で、アイザックさん何か、この国際情勢と、今の状況についてコメントがあればいただければと思いますが。
Certainly. I think from the perspective, as you've heard, and we've all experienced, the impact on the supply chain and being able to understand, it's really being able to look up and down that through the value chain, right? Where Catena-X is looking and in different aspects, and really understand that and be able to have that, again, that crystal ball to predict and to forecast. I think that's critical. And that's another aspect of digital transformation that needs to be considered. And then how do you manage that data effectively? And how do you trust that data? I think there's great strides that have been made, but we're really still needing to work considerably in these different areas. And again, mentioning about the circular economy, look at that from an environmental standpoint, from a societal standpoint, equitable. And then that brings back the governance of the data. With great access to data comes great responsibility. And we've already seen, where bad actors can interplay there. And so that security, again, becomes a very key area to be addressed.
はい、ありがとうございます。越塚先生、何か日本の立場ではなくてもいいんですけど、
はいはい、今お三方のお話も聞いてて、やっぱり2つ思ったことがありまして、シチュエーションですよね。インターナショナルシチュエーションで、一つはソーシャルシチュエーション、ポリティカルとかエコノミカル情報ありますけどのシチュエーションの話と、あとは価値観ですね。バリューが随分やっぱりチェンジして変わってきたかなというふうに思って、それでもうポリティカルシチュエーションとエコノミカルシチュエーションはもうね、皆さんご存知のようにいろいろな紛争が起こってきて、実はこの20年間ぐらいが実はあんまりなかった、冷戦が終わってからあまりなかったのが珍しいぐらいで、むしろ今が普通なのかもしれないって、ちょっと悲観的な言い方ですけどなのかもしれない。だけどテクノロジーデカップリングとかいろいろ言われますけれども、ただやっぱ経済の方で見ていくと、やっぱりグローバル化って実は全然分断化されてなくって、多分どんどん進んでいて、で今までは経済もグローバル、政治もフリーでグローバルで一致してたんですけど、なんか今のシチュエーションはなんか経済はグローバル化してボーダーレスになっていくんだけど、ポリティカルには分断が進んでてミスマッチしてますよね。だからこのミスマッチは今までなかったんじゃないかなと思ってて、そこをどう乗り越えていくのかっていうのが、政府の役割は何なのか、産業界の役割は何なのかといったことを考えて、このミスマッチを解消をどうしていくのかなっていうのが今の課題だなと思ったのが1点目です。で、2点目はやはり、ね、ドイツの皆様、やっぱりグリーンの話っていうかカーボンニュートラルの話、気候変動の話をやっぱだいぶされて、日本よりもかなりその辺の感度というかが高いのかなとは思って伺ってまして、でそのグリーンの問題、環境の問題とやっぱり COVID-19 の問題があって、それで今までの、グローバルでエフィシェンシーですよね、効率化とエコノミーとそういうものを優先してきたことから、今日も少しね言葉出てましたけど、サステナビリティであるとか、もしかしたらウェルビーイングみたいな話が入ったりとか、環境の話とかそういうのが入ってきて、価値観自体もやっぱりなんか大きく変わってきてる感じがするんですね。これがやっぱりここ5年10年の大きなこういうインターナショナルシチュエーションの変化っていう意味ではその2点かなと思って聞いていました。はい、
はい、ありがとうございました。ではですね、もう一つの観点からいくとですね、 技術レベルというか技術環境の変化というかですね、ここほんのこの最近話題になっています生成系 AI が出てきたということは、このデータ連携あるいはデータ活用という意味での価値創造に非常に大きな影響を与えるんではないかなというふうに感じているんですが、まあそれはもともと期待していたのか、あるいは何なのかっていうところをその辺をちょっとコメントいただければと思いますが、まあ、同じような順番でまずはOtto先生から伺ってよろしいでしょうか。
Yeah, indeed. I mean, that is also an important aspect that and that's basically also good news, right? That we have, let's say, also technology innovation that allows us to address the increasing number of challenges that we are confronted with. And I think we all would agree that Gen AI in general has lots of opportunities that we can seize in order to do that. To be a bit more concrete on what I could imagine as, let's say, next steps of the evolution when it comes to data sharing and data ecosystems, what we see is a lot of, let's say, activities which have recently been started in the endeavor to, evolve data space architectures into something which would, let's say, host a large language model for a certain domain, which is also needed because in the end, and that was also mentioned by Henning Banthien, but also by other speakers, and also by Dan, if I'm not mistaken, interoperability is key. And if we face the truth, we still have huge issues in, let's say, achieving interoperability between, let's say, different systems which form a data infrastructure of a data ecosystem, and or also the different sources that basically data sources that feed a digital twin. And while we still struggle with very foundational problems like, let's say, integration on a syntactic and format or data scheme level, what is a greater challenge to overcome is, of course, semantic interoperability. I mean, semantic technologies and semantic interoperability has been around for 30 years almost. But let's face it, I mean, it's one of the, most unfulfilled promises, if you ask me. So I see great potential through the emergence of LLMs in this domain, because they might help to overcome the semantic integration challenges. Of course, it's, as always, also not a silver bullet, because it's large language models, of course, so it's related to, language and mainly text. And we, as an industrial environment, are used to exchange not only, let's say, unstructured data, documents, for example, but most of the time structured data. But this is, I think, an interesting and promising pathway forward, also in the collaboration between research, academia on the one hand side, but also industrial applications on the other, to further develop the large language model concept and large language models themselves, in order to be better capable to store, if I may, or represent the shared, semantic knowledge of a certain industrial domain. And if we would make that one of the foundations of data spaces in the future, to serve the needs and the different innovative applications which emerge in a data ecosystem, I think this will be a very, very powerful way forward. And we have started already first project to do that. And I think that is very promising, as I said, and also it would allow us, perhaps, that as a last comment, to close the gap between what we sometimes call data engineering on the one hand side, and AI, or what has been used earlier on, data science as a more general term on the other hand. Because again, here, let's face it, it's two different worlds that usually need to be brought together. in data engineering, we usually have engineers which like to basically define standards and directives which everybody should adhere to, and would like to see everything being in nice order. And on the data science and AI side, you rather have, let's call it the urban knowledge worker, who is creative, innovative, and doesn't really want to stick to so many rules. And these two groups need to be brought together. And I think a joint, let's say, endeavor working towards LLMs residing in data spaces and serving a data ecosystem as such might, as a byproduct, also a nice opportunity to bring these different worlds together.
なるほど、ありがとうございます。少しインダストリー 4.0 の方からもうパシットさんお願いできたと思います。
Yes, let me first react to a comment you made earlier, because I think that's a very valid point, is that also in the changes in the international landscape, we need to look at the value systems we're actually based on in our work, and I think that is a very fundamental thought also for the way we as countries and industries cooperate. With regard to generative AI, so the first part is I do think we are all surprised with regard to the level of foresight we had, right? So I think the development did catch many by surprise, and the speed in which it develops now as well. And this is interesting, and this should make us think about what the future may bring to us. And just very practically from the last weeks, I had conversations, and this is really with regard now to small and medium-sized companies, because also this is a challenge we share with Japan, how to bring them on the digital transformation path. So far, one of the major obstacles they had was simply the lack of programmers and software experts in smaller companies. Now with generative AI, we have run first experiments where you can ask ChatGPT to sort of program you parts of what you need to digitize your production, and voila, it works quite well. And it takes just a couple of hours, a work where you would otherwise would need an expert to do it, and then it would take at least 2 or 3 weeks to do so. And now it's half a day, and you just ask ChatGPT. So what major difference will that make? So I think that's a huge opportunity, which is really interesting for us to look at. And another point, I think again, the two countries having such a strong basis in the industrial sector, we need to strongly look at the industrial data we sit on and we have, and how to explore it and make sure that AI is actually building its competence on these very specific data where we have a lot of knowledge and expertise in, to make a competitive advantage out of that.
ありがとうございます。では、アイザックさん、なんかこの点についてはどうでしょうか。
Certainly, I think just as we've seen just the swiftness of the adoption of the generative AI and AI in general, looking at that, we continue to see the evolution. And just a few days ago, right, the announcement where it came out, one of the headlines of one of the articles actually read specifically AI advanced changes everything again. It really was about not just LLMs, but now about large multimodal AI. So now you're combining this out, and this is just a matter of days where this has been now brought out. And I would also liken this as an evolution that we're seeing unfold right before our eyes. And we're seeing the very rapid democratization of this technology throughout. There was that one famous quote, I guess, that was brought out before, where they said, "There is no moat." The genie's out of the bottle, and we're seeing this evolve so quickly. And even within the membership of the consortium, we're seeing this evolution of digital twins. And this is again coming from the founder of the concept, Dr. Michael Greaves, back in the early 2000s. He wrote a pivotal paper on product lifecycle management, where it was identifying this concept and working with John Vickers, who's lead at NASA for advanced manufacturing, brought out this term, digital twin, which Dr. Vickers said, that really is a very appropriate term. I'm going to take it and I'm going to use it. And he leveraged that. But he said, I will always give John Vickers the credit for the coining the term. But he's taken that to the next level. He wrote a pivotal paper again. It's one of the most highly downloaded papers on digital twin off ResearchGate. And that's looking at the complexity of systems and the evolution of a digital twin in terms of how it is being really evolving from a goal-directed and a passive scenario where we have told it, this is what we want to see the trigger event. We want to be informed at this point, to now looking at it from much more active and having these AI agents always monitoring. And rather than goal-directed, it's actually goal-seeking. And being able to look at that, and we're seeing that evolution play out with the infusion of AI in many of these different areas from that standpoint. And I think we are on that rapid evolutionary path right now.
ありがとうございました。じゃあ越塚先生、何かコメントをいただければと思います。
じゃあこれも2つで、1つは AI のことなんですけども、僕ね、マシンラーニングとかディープラーニングをベースとした今のジェネレーティブ AI もそうですけど、これをね AI と呼ぶことに僕は反対。これね AI じゃない。これ言いたいのはね、これ AI じゃなくて、僕これはねデータドリブンインテリジェンスだと思ってるんですよ。で AI ってもともとは1956年にジョン・マッカーシー先生が、プロフェッサージョン・マッカーシーねがアーティフィシャルインテリジェンスっていう言葉を提唱しましたと。でそれから20年も30年も間って基本的にはファーストオーダーロジックとかロジックベースでずっとやってきたわけですよね。それでロジックでやってきて、結構 AI ってのは行き詰まってきて、それでデータを使い始めたんですね。インターネットが出てきてデータをやってきた。でそういう意味だと、第2世代と言われている1980年代に行われてきた AI と今のマシンラーニングとかディープラーニングベースの AI っていうのは、これテクノロジーはね180度逆なんですよ。全然違うんですよ。で全然違うものなのにアーティフィシャルインテリジェンスと名付けたものが勝ちだね、あれね。であれは僕らからするとデータから作ったインテリジェンスなんだから、ロジックから作ったんじゃないんですよ。あれデータから作ったんですよ。だからあれね、アーティフィシャルインテリジェンスって言わないでね、あれ僕らここデータの業界でデータの集まりだから、僕ねデータドリブンインテリジェンス DDI とかって呼んだ方が僕らはいいんじゃないかってずっと思ってまして、だからこれからはまずここで僕言いたいのはデータドリブンインテリジェンスって呼ぼうということが一つ言いたいことで、この、ただマシンラーニングとディープラーニングジェネレーティブ AI、 これ AI のテクノロジーでいうとまだわからないことが多い。なんでジェネレーティブ AI がある程度の規模になると突然インテリジェンスが出てくるのかまだ解明がされていない。それとあと、スケーラビリティのスケーリングローと言われているものもどこまでスケーリングがし続けるのかまだこれも誰もわからない。本当にスケーリングローがいつまでも続くのかもこれわからないので、まだまだわからないことが多いっていうことからすると、まだまだ発展の余地がある技術だっていうことは知っておくべきかなと思うし、でそれはデータの観点で言えばデータを使ってできるインテリジェンスだから、データの消費者であるのと同時にデータを今度生成しますのでデータのプロデューサーでもあるという意味では、データの分野にとってこの AI っていう AI って言っちゃいけないんだ、DDI っていうんだなは非常に重要なテクノロジーだと思いますというのが一つで、もう一つ今皆さん忘れてることの僕とっても重要なテクノロジカルのビューはね、ムーアの法則の終焉。 実はもうコンピューターは速くなりません。これはとても重要で、コンピューターが生まれてから初めての事態です。初めてです。コンピューターはもう速くならない。だから、今 AI のチップにせよ並列化しかやりませんよね。いかに並列化するかということと、アプリケーションにどうやってアダプトするかしか行わないので、根本的にはクロックスを速くすることはもうできない中で、これコンピューター系のテクノロジーは大きく変わりますよ、これね。で今どんどん変わってきてるはずで、やっぱこれを抑えて、これは今後データのこととかインフラとかやっぱ考える必要があるな、ないしは投資をする時でも考える必要があるというふうに思っています。
なるほど。ありがとうございました。もうだいぶ時間も押しているので、最後に一言ずついただくと思いますが、ここでちょっと質問を取りたいと思いますが、今までのお話で会場から何かコメントがあるようでしたら、1、2件受けたいと思いますが。はい。もし会場からないようでしたら、オンラインで来ているものを拾いたいと思います。まず一つは、オット先生に対してですが、データエコシステムの話について、エコシステムの構造やルールを決めるのには、オープン性や透明性が重要だと思うが、同時に話がまとまらないとか時間がかかるという課題もあるように感じますと。ヨーロッパではこれをどのようにして超えてきたのか、あるいは時間をかけて議論を重ねるのか、どういうふうにやるのかという質問が来ておりますが、お答えいただけますでしょうか。
Yes, I mean, we definitely spend a lot of time in discussing much, but that's probably not the answer to this question. No, I think it's right. I mean, of course, as I mentioned, we need to find the right balance between openness and transparency on the one hand side, and on the other hand, also the protection of the interest of the data providers and of the data users. So this balance is one of the key ingredients, so to say, of a functioning ecosystem. And the question is perfectly right, because if we would rely on, let's say, manual negotiation, for example, by two legal departments of a data provider organization and a data receiver organization, then that would just take too long and would be too expensive in order to allow for fruitful business cases. Therefore, we need to implement both the, as I said, the policy management for the data into technology, but also the negotiation process. Because, I mean, yeah, everybody has preferences about what to do with certain pieces of data, for example, and as I said, in the circular economy use cases. And data providers have also other preferences about what should be done with their data and what should not. And these kind of preferences can be translated and represented in machine-readable format. And what we do is we use rule languages to do that. For example, ODRL. So it's an open digital write language, which allows us to represent these references, these preferences in a machine-readable form. And then basically use algorithms to negotiate the different, let's say, well, schemas or settings in terms of policies which data providers put on their data, and which also data users have in their mind in terms of what they want to do with the data from other sources. That is one strand of work that we follow, but of course there are others. I'm not sure whether Hagen-Heubach mentioned that earlier today, but in Catena-X we came up with what we call the flight level model. So we have different levels of governance in a data ecosystem, where the highest level basically defines, okay, if I want to join Catena-X, I have to obey this 10 commandments, for example, basically written on paper. But if you go down then 4 levels, then you end up in what I described before, that we have, let's say, a technical representation of the policies which are attached to the data, and also instrument into place, which allows us to well negotiate the different preferences in order then come to an agreement, to a consent, which then also is basically stored in the distributed data infrastructure.
はい、ありがとうございます。あともう一件、この一番下のところで英語で来てますが、アイザックさんに質問が来ております。We see many silo systems in manufacturing company, resulting no.
I'm not able to see that on my screen. If you could.
Okay. あ、画面上に映ってないですか。OK。映ってないのこれ。
No, that's okay.
Okay. So we see many.
There, but it's very, very small for me.
Okay, so I read it, this question.
There we go.
We see many silo systems in manufacturing company, resulting in no unified data models. Would object-oriented approach help improving this situation?
I think the better way to look at that is more in terms of how do you ensure that interoperability between those areas? You know, how can we, I won't say break the silos down, but how can we assure there are at least conduits of that information to be able to allow that data flow between those different areas? I think also standardization and the use of these standards, which there really is no one standard for a digital twin, if we look at it in that context, because it's very application dependent. But what you look for is the way through the different capabilities, that's where the standards exist. And now the question is, how do you ensure that you can have that interoperability between those areas? You know, look at it in terms of different aspects related to that. So yes, from I guess some of the different areas for manufacturing with those data silos, how can you bring that information out through different standards that allow the interoperability, as has been discussed, which is so key to this, especially when you look at a system of systems that needs to be considered. So I think that's where you really need to look at that, and how can you, how can you provide that opportunity to have that data flow through those different areas and those conduits between that? Think about that as digital connections. What are the digital connectors? I think that was mentioned earlier that could be applied in this case.
はい、ありがとうございました。それではですね、だいぶ時間も終わりに近づいてまいりましたので、最後にですね、皆様からですね、先ほどお話ししたような世界情勢であるとか技術の変化などを踏まえてですね、これから最も注力していくべきポイントっていうのはを少し短い時間 1,2 分でコメントしていただいてまとめにしたいと思います。では最初にOtto先生からお願いできますでしょうか。
Well, that's not easy. I think, as I said, I mean, there are a lot of, let's say, challenges, and the number of them is increasing, and you have the impression that we are in constant crisis mode. So it's not a crisis, but it's a permanent state. I think we should, let's say, not forget, let's say, that we have it in our hands, and innovation is the pathway forward for a better life, for better societies, and let's say more efficient and environmental friendly business operations. I'm a true believer that that data is one of the most strategic resources to to spur this this journey towards a better life. And to me, it's also very fascinating and still a lot of, let's say, motivation to make a contribution in such a collaborative environment to move forward on this journey. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm also truly convinced that this can only be done together. And therefore, I'm so glad that we have this this collaboration also between Japan and Europe, and in particular Germany. Have been having this for quite some time. There are a lot of, let's say, there's a lot of work for us still to do, but I think we are well prepared, and I think we should keep up this spirit in driving, let's say, technological innovation forward for the better of our societies and economies.
ありがとうございます。ハンセンさん、ぜひお願いします。
Yeah, I'd like to tie back your question, so the aspect of technology, and link it back to the grand challenges we were starting off with in our discussion, and to focus on the notion of sustainability, or as it is today is often called the ESG criteria in company strategies, because I think to make up our minds, you know, what is technology-wise the focus we should look at in order to fulfill sustainability goals. And here, you know, for example, and also today, we have discussed new opportunities within circularity. You know, what are all the opportunities we have and the new technological solutions we can build in developing circularity systems. These create new business models, new sources for value creation, and they fulfill sustainability goals. And in here again, I think it super well showcases this is only possible if we work based on data spaces and if we work collaboratively on an international level in a close cooperation as we have it between Japan and Europe, Germany. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございました。それではアイザックさん、お願いします。
Yeah, I think it really, I mean, the common theme we've heard here is that no one man is an island. It really is about this collaboration and being able to work together to achieve these really very challenging goals, and you know, facing it head on with technology. And I won't say AI, I will say the data-driven intelligence is really where we see this continuing to be across all industries. Very excited about what's going on now in healthcare and life science as a result. You know, it really shows how technology can provide that continued advancement for the betterment of society and of all of us. And I think looking at that from an environmental, from a sustainable, you've heard about from the circular economy, looking at those from that perspective, I think that's critical. And obviously with the governance, there's many opportunities, and we've already seen this across the board in bad actors and the let's say the ethics that are now surrounding AI and the use of that. So I think all those things need to be considered, and again, look at it from the security and the trustworthiness of that data. So I think we need to look at that from an overall perspective, and this collaboration is what will help to drive that on a global scale.
はい、ありがとうございます。じゃあ最後になりますが、
はい、
藤塚先生。
2つのことありまして、1つはやっぱりちょっと対極感なんですけれども、やっぱりデータの時代なんだと思うんですねっていうのが重要で、なぜかっていうと、これ、デジタル IT の仕組みの方で言うと、もうメカニズムを考える方って ピークアウトしてるんですよね。どういうことかっていうと、例えば学会でコンピューターサイエンスの論文って減ってるんですよ。もう新しいメカニズム出ないんですよ。多分オブジェクト思考が最後じゃないかって、新しいアイディアはその後出ないで、もうムーアの法則も終わったと。そうなってくるとね、主役はデータなんですよ。やっぱりどう考えてもデータ、そこに移ってきてると。だからこれはやっぱり大きな大局観でね、 AI はね、 AI はね、メカニズム側のね、最後のあがきだと思うんですよ。だってもう学会やってると AI 以外盛り上がんないもん。AI だけなんですよ、もうほとんど。っていうようになってしまっていて、だからそういう意味で対極的に見ると、ICT って言われる分野とかデジタルっていう分野の主役はもう完全にデータですよね。だからこれはやっぱり対極観として見誤っちゃいけないことだと僕は思います。一番冒頭にね、スローだとかって悪口みたいなこと言いましたけど、でも本当はデータが主役だし、データの時代なんだと思ってますっていうのが1点目で、2点目はやっぱりインターナショナルコラボレーションがとっても重要ですね。ちょっとコロナがあってやっぱりちょっと中断したところがありますけれども、やっぱりデータの流通とか共有っていうのはグローバルに行われるものなので、こういった取り組みは今日とってもいい機会だと思います。インターナショナルに、コラボレーションしていくっていうことがこの後とても重要になると思いますので、ぜひ引き続きやっていきたいと思います。以上です。
はい、ありがとう。登壇した皆様ありがとうございました。短い時間の議論にしては難しい課題でしたが、非常にいい議論ができたんではないかなと思います。それでは皆様、登壇の者の皆様に拍手をお願いいたします。どうもありがとうございました。Thank you. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you.
はい。
Thank you. Bye bye.
それではこのセッションはこれで終わりにしたいと思いますが、この後休憩を挟みまして15時15分から次のセッション3が始まります。セッション3では日独連携協力についてお話がありますので、ぜひよろしくお願いします。